Welcome to another Down the Rabbit Hole video. We're going to be talking some Star Frontiers, and this time we're going to be talking something alien, hence the environment I'm in. We're actually going to talk about my aliens that I created for my campaign. Now, I kind of hinted on this in the last one where I went over Zebulon's Guide to Frontier Space. Suddenly the floodgates are open with all different kinds of stuff that you can do as a referee. Here's some new creatures, here's some new planets, here's some new weapons, here's some new equipment. And I had up to that point been a little reluctant to introduce a new alien race because I thought, has this all been balanced properly? You know, in a sort of, I always use the example of like StarCraft. That game is designed with the humans, the Zerg, and the Protoss kind of, they've got pluses and minuses to each of them. Have you thought this all out? And then my friend who was a big, he was our DM for Dungeons and Dragons. He had said, dude, why don't you just make all kinds of aliens? Like, what's the problem? And he had a variety of variations on elves and gnomes and, you know, halflings and all that stuff in his campaign. So it just seemed to make sense. So why don't you include some aliens in your, other aliens in your game? And with the advent of Zebulon's Guide, that sort of broke the chains for me. And I thought, okay, so since they've introduced the Humma and the Osakar and various others, I'm gonna maybe toy with making one or two of my own. But I've got a few rules involved in this. Now, I, being big into science fiction, really have a problem when I see an alien depicted in film or whatever, or in comic books, or, you know, in more things where a budget is not a factor. Like, I'll excuse television because, you know, you're dealing with a weekly show, etc. But anything that's sort of more complex, I really have a problem with any alien that I see where it's just a guy in a suit. Because to me, you know, I can't remember the quote from Carl Sagan, but he said, you know, you look at all the complexity of the Earth, and human beings are the evolved end of the chain of one particular path on a very complicated planet of Earth. Imagine an alien world with an alien physiology and an alien ecology. What kind of creatures could ever come out of that? So for me, seeing a guy in a suit was always like, I kind of let the Azarians a free pass because they are from the Star Frontiers rulebook. They're kind of created by TSR, so of course they get an honorary. They stay. I keep them. But I was so happy that the Dralosites look different and weird, and I love them. And the Vrusks were very different and weird, and I love them too. So I thought, okay, I need to make an alien race that is not a guy in a suit. However, a problem with if you go too weird is you are creating an adventure game where there's going to be situations where somebody's, you know, down in a pit and you got to lower down a rope. Or, you know, leaping across from one, you know, little cliff to another. Or, you know, jumping into a car or rolling out of the way of something. And so if you make something that's really weird, that's going to cause problems for the player of that character. So I thought, okay, so within these weird confines, I don't want to be a guy in a suit, and I don't want it to be, well, I want it to be super weird, but if it's going to be something that looks like, you know, I don't know, a crazy a jigsaw puzzle piece, that's not going to work for the game. So what would be an alien race that's a little alien but sort of can do all of the stuff that will be required in the game? At the time, I was a really big fan, still am, of the movie The Secret of Nim, and that was a movie that is still to this day a movie I highly recommend. If you haven't seen it, check it out. It's awesome. It's from the guys, Don Bluth and crew, who they also did Anastasia and All Dogs Go to Heaven. But this is one of their earliest works. And in there, it's a really cool following rodents, mice and rats in this little farmyard area. And their world, you know, it's all much larger. A little bush is suddenly this giant forest for them because they're little tiny animals. And I was just very taken with The Secret of Nim. I thought, okay, there's a good foundation to start with. A rat creature that can stand on its haunches, sort of erect. So, okay, yeah, I'm going to make them. What will I call these creatures? First of all, I drew the picture, and this was going to be my first alien race. Obviously a carbon copy of the mice out of The Secret of NIMH, but I thought, okay, yeah, this is at least a good start. You're in an area where you're kind of, you've got some familiarity, and, you know, certainly anybody who's into like the furry movement would definitely immediately catch on or sympathize, recognize this is a kind of a character that they want to play. So, all right, cool. So yeah, I'm on the right track. I've got kind of that animalistic, almost Disneyland Robin Hood type of, as a fox type of thing. So, okay. What am I going to call them? I used to write all my stuff listening to the stereo in front of the tape deck with my headphones on, and I would sit there and like draw stuff or write up stuff in my book for my campaign. And we had a variety of tapes all sitting around, and one of which, I don't remember what the title was. I think it was some folk music stuff or something like that. However, it was distributed by the Pickwick Press, obviously in reference to the Pickwick Papers from Charles Dickens. But I just saw the word Pickwick Press, and I thought, Pickwick, that's got a roll to it. That's got a neat kind of a... Yeah, that'll work. That's something I imagine an alien race of rodents might call themselves. We are the Pickwicks. And it was the name that I sort of embraced for them. They have... Each of these aliens has an interesting story with the name of where I got it from, by the way. We'll get to when I do the others. Pickwicks were straight off a cassette tape cover that said the Pickwick Press. I was like, okay, that's it. Years later, my friends went past a fish and chip shop called Mr. Pickwick's Fish and Chip Shop, and they're like, hey, you know, somebody's using your alien race idea for this fish and chip shop? I'm like, okay, I kind of need to explain to you where that name comes from, but whatever, anyway. Also in The Secret of NIMH, there's an interesting dynamic among the different, like there's different kinds of mice or rodents in there. There's Mrs. Brisby, our main character, fabulous heroine for the show. I could go into at length about Secret of NIMH itself. It's an amazing movie. She's an amazing character in a very non-predictable type of a film. So she was going to be kind of the mold of what the main race was like, the mice. Now, she runs into Mr. Ages, who is a smaller, I don't know if he's a mouse or what, very different stature. And she also has anti-shrew, which we can imagine means that's a shrew. So I kind of I didn't take the shrew idea, but I did take the idea of Mr. Ages, maybe like a little gerbil or something. And I made him being one kind of cross-section of this race, and the Mrs. Brisby main guys. And in the movie, there's a very big storyline element to do with how all of these field rodents, they manage to eke out an existence, you know, in this little agrarian life that they have. But they're jealous and suspicious of the rats, who kind of seem to own the technology and live down in the ground. And if you ever have to deal with the rats, that's a problem. Again, watch the movie. So I had a rat-like representation as well. And I thought, okay, we've got these three different races or subdivisions, ethnicities, if you will, within the Pickwick race. So I came up with individual names for each of them. Mrs. Bisbee's race, or ethnicity, I called them the Jeckers, because again, I was going for like anything that has like a j or a ch sound, because that has kind of a chewing on nuts, chipmunk kind of a sound vibe going. So her race were the Jeckers, or ethnicity. For Mr. Ages, I kind of went a little different with like a hamster gerbil idea, so I called them the Podums. And very much anybody who played my game long enough and then saw The Secret of NIMH were like, you just totally copied that right out of the movie. The taller, darker, and sort of more suspicious, the race that is obviously based on the rats, I call them the Rasts, R-H-A-S-T. Because I just loved in the movie how they would go about, oh, you don't want to deal with the rats. Oh, the rats, you have to talk to the rats. And that really, really captured me. So yes, I totally copied right out of the movie The tallest of the 3 Pickwick races was called the Rast, which was in reference to Secret of Nim. So that was my first alien race that I made, and I was pretty happy about it. You could see them putting on clothes. You could see them, borrowing gloves from somebody, even though they only had 3 fingers, the sort of Disney or Simpsons kind of idea. This would work. They could, you could toss them your rifle and you would pick it up and start shooting. So yes, the Pickwicks for my first out of the gate alien, I thought, this is going to work. I like this. This is sort of, it follows a logic. They're not terribly alien, but they're obviously not a guy in a suit. I mean, I guess furries would argue, no, we could totally dress up like that. So yeah, it was it didn't follow my rule about not a guy in a suit precisely, but it was close enough for me. I was happy with it. I thought, okay, I need something that can swing on vines in a tree or jump into a car or pick up a gun or sit at a computer terminal. So yes, I'm going to go with the Pickwicks, and that's going to be my very first race. So I created them. Now this was actually toward the phase of my campaign where it was winding down. Various members of my player group were becoming kind of busy with summer jobs and stuff. And we were moving to England not too long after. So I was kind of like, okay, I've got time to work on this. I'm not going to probably bring them into my campaign, but let's get these races going. And I talked to my DM and he's like, that's a pretty good idea for a race. I like that. That's cool. What else are you going to make? You're going to make the silvery pool? Which was a running joke that he had of like, why not? Way before Terminator 2 came out, I just did a video about that on Game Gear. You remember he's like a liquid metal creature, right? So my DM was always joking about, you should make a creature that's just a silvery mercury kind of amorphic that can turn themselves into anything. I was like, well, A, we've already got the Dralocytes for that. And B, that's like, how's it going to wear clothes and stuff? Like I was very rooted in, I got to remember this has to work within the context of the role of the rules and the situations and getting into vehicles and picking up, wearing clothes and defensive armor and stuff like that. Because in Zebulon's Guide, I talked about they made new kinds of defenses, suits, vests, belts, new kinds of screens to deflect energy weapons. If I'm going to have something that's basically this silvery pool that can just sort of wobble around and do stuff, that looks great on paper from like a creative point of view, but that's not actually going to work for a player character race, so no. And ironically, the second creature that I created, I initially was going to make it a player character race. But over the intervening time before I actually started up my campaign again, I kind of looked at it and I thought, I've broken my own rule. Again, this is not going to be very useful for a player to play. So it started as a player character race, but actually it became a non-player character race. Like number 3, but we'll get there. So my second one, I wanted to go again, not somebody in a suit, but kind of recognizable to somebody playing it, how this thing would move and how it would operate. Not a silvery pool. And there was a creature in Return of the Jedi. It's got a weird looking name, Biblioclick or something like that. Anyway, it's basically a dog that Princess Leia, she's dressed up as Boosh taking Chewbacca to see Jabba. She kind of walks past it and this thing just sort of barks at her. And it's essentially just a torso with 2 legs. And that kind of, now it's very mean looking, but that kind of planted the seed of like, okay, a torso and just 2 stocky legs, maybe a tail, so it can pick up weapons and stuff. Yeah, that's kind of neat. And I was also, I think in some music video, there was like a lot of shots of sumo wrestlers, how they start off, doing they've got their legs sort of down and they're ready, and then they vault themselves forward with a great power and fighting capability. So again, I was going for that sumo wrestler kind of weird creature from Jabba's palace. And in my head, I came up with this torso with 2 legs and a tail. Again, the tail was very important, and because it was, again, a player character race initially, the feet on the legs were going to be very long and be able to grasp things. And then I had visions of, well, how's he going to stand up then? Was he going to lean on one and just like pull a gun, something? Then I was thinking, well, the tail could be used to hold him up while he's shooting, or maybe he stands on both of these and he wraps the tail around his very prehensile rat-like tail to pull the trigger. There was stuff like that in my mind, but I came up with this creature, and I kind of basically took a torso and I shaved the front of it right off and put a sort of a funny Disney kind of a face on it. It looks almost like something from a cartoon. It doesn't look like a real creature at all. I tried my best to give it a life that would be maybe believable, but it was my second attempt, and it was sort of going outside the rule book. It's like, okay, the Pickwicks fit nicely into a lot of scenarios. Let's push the envelope a bit. Let's make this creature. What am I going to call this creature? And at the time I was working in a warehouse, just, going through, because when you're sort of working with your hands a lot, I'm occupying myself with more important things like, what am I going to do for this alien race in my Starfrontiers campaign? And I do remember thinking to myself, where I worked, they made things like handles for axes and stuff like that. There was a lathe in there that they would, put a piece of wood on, and you would shave it down and it would make a shape. And I had to bag the items, and then there was tons of sawdust kicking up and all this kind of stuff. So it was in the lathe room, and there were quite a few times I would find myself, as I'm thinking about this creature, I was thinking, oh man, I gotta go to the bathroom. Oh, I really gotta go to the bathroom. And for some reason, go to the bathroom, and the lathe room morphed together into what I ended up calling this creature. I was also I was aware of Conan the Barbarian movie, James Earl Jones's Thulsa Doom, which had a neat kind of a ring, you could bounce off that. It had a neat jingoistic style. So I morphed, go to the bathroom, I'm in the lathe room, and with that Thulsa Doom thing going on, it formed the name of this creature, which was the Gablethoom. Gablethoom. I'm in the lathe room, I gotta go to the bathroom. This is the Gablethoom. That's where it came from. Very, very strange. And my mother was very interested in these sort of philosophy books and writings, and there was audio tapes she would listen to, sort of Zen, Eastern philosophy kind of things. And one little item that came up in those was the idea of property, and how in the West we are very fixated on what belongs to us, what is our property, what do we own. And in other cultures, and in primitive cultures, there's no such thing as property. It's just what you have around you, the natural environment and items that you can pick up and craft or whatever. It was very freeing. And I thought to myself, these guys, they look like a very primitive race. They look like something, again, with that sumo wrestler kind of pounding thing. I'm getting this tribal, primal sort of element looking at the Gablethoom. And I thought, yeah, okay, this will be an alien race that followed that philosophy. There's no such thing as property. There's just stuff around you. And they are thrust into a high-tech society where everybody is what belongs to them in possession. That could make for some interesting argument, or, a little bit of friction or conflict for the players and the stories to play themselves out. So that's where I was thinking I might go with the Gablethoom. They never actually ended up appearing in my campaign, ever. I mean, I fleshed out my world for years, because I was living in the UK and I didn't have anybody to play with initially for a while. But I just spent lots of time, filling in lots and lots of details about what was my Starfrontiers campaign full of. And the Gablethoom, although they never appeared per se, there was one time they kind of were hinted at. On their home planet, which the Vrusks had colonized, Zicket, I think it was, the Vrusks were very intelligent and made to think, okay, we can't just exploit these primitives. There are rules about this kind of stuff. We're not monsters. So we work side by side with these primitives and maybe try to teach them, this is what electricity is, this is what, cleanliness is, that kind of thing. This is what dentistry is. Not that the Vrusks had teeth, but anyway, we're getting beside the point. And what would end up happening, because the Vrusks are very corporate and very businesslike and very... They think in terms of being an entrepreneur, being a businessman, and being, buy and sell, trade and profit, and, needs and demand, supply and demand, that kind of thing. The Gablethoom, being a primitive race that doesn't understand property at all, this is really cool, I'm just going to take that, would drive the Vrusks crazy. And one of my players passed through Zicket on his way somewhere, and he had to go to the space station and get some information or something like that. And he was wondering, why are all the Vrusks on this space station so stressed out? Like, they've all got headaches. They're all popping pills to keep themselves on an even keel. And they'd all be like, well, what do you want, man? What's going on? You haven't done your paperwork yet. You're supposed to do your paperwork. It's like, he didn't know, because he didn't go to the surface of the planet. He never met the Gablethoom. But he just wondered, like, these Vrusks are absolutely wound up like a $2 clock on this planet. What's going on? And I just smiled. I was like, I know, but I can't tell you unless you go to the planet. So that was, unfortunately, the only time the Gablethoom ever actually made an appearance. As I say, years later, in retrospect, I was thinking, that's going to be a problem. If he gets, like, a defensive suit, he's not going to really be able to wear it much, and... I don't know. Maybe I'll move those guys into, like, non-player character territory, because if somebody wants to play one, sure, but it's not gonna lend itself well. So I opted not to really follow suit with the Gablethoom. Much like number 3. Now, this is actually something I took from Zebulon's Guide. In there, they created the Ifschnitz, which had been actually in some... I can't remember where it was. I had heard the name before I had got Zebulon's Guide to Frontier Space. I don't know if it was like a Dragon Magazine article or something, but there was this idea of the Capellan free merchants traveling through the stars, mostly in the Outer Rim, and selling and buying and taking stories from one place to another and that kind of thing. This traveling caravan kind of idea was taking root, and the Ifschnitz were in Zebulon's Guide, but they were just little guys, just humans with braided hair, and they were, not as tall as other humans. And I was just like, nope, I'm not doing that. I'm not having the Ifschnitz be these little gnome-like creatures that, like, I really have a problem with what is obviously just a guy in a suit. Even though the Gablethoom... But anyway. So I decided... No, I'm not going to do that. And then I thought to myself, oh, what if there's a module, or what if there's something important to the overall campaign where the Capellan free merchants come up and the Ifschnitz appear? You're maybe going to need to make your own Ifschnitz. So I did, completely made this up out of my own sort of imagination. I drew up this thing, which I kind of imagined as being like an owl, like he's got little like talon feet, like an owl standing on a branch does. Little kind of human hands, but I was going to make them like with a carapace on them, like very rattly. If he was to drum his fingers, it would sound like drumming on a metal surface, and just covered in hair. A friendly race, but this sort of weirdly, I guess, little walking owl type guys. For some reason, I don't even know where I got the inspiration for that. I think I just drew what came to my mind of this little squat furry owl creature that I thought would fit the Ifschnit idea in the Zebulon's Guide of like a small race. And I like the idea of him being, a buyer and seller, a trader of the caravan type of mentality. And I just thought, yeah, that'll work. And for their personality, I wish I could remember, I tried looking this up and I couldn't find it. Maybe Swifto will know, because it's from a Doctor Who episode. It was one, I'm fairly sure, it was the Tom Baker era, when he and Leela were on some alien planet. And I think he got into a flying car, a white kind of vehicle, and it flew up into the floating city, or it was a space station or something up there. I wish I could remember the name of the episode. I tried Googling it, but every time I Googled for Doctor Who Tom Baker, flying car. All I got was John Pertwee and his Who-mobile. So I was like, all right, that's not going to work. That's not the Doctor Who episode I'm looking for. So Swifto, or any Doctor Who fan, maybe you know the episode I mean, in this one or around either before it or after it, because I remember it being part of the same story. Doctor Who encounters a couple of guys who were very, they were dressed, a couple of actors dressed like cavemen, a lot of hair. That's sort of, I got that hairy element for the Ifschnitz. And they were obviously some comedy team, these two guys, because they were playing off each other. Very funny, very, I can't even describe it. And again, I can't recall the scene in order to know why I thought of the Ifschnitz when I thought of these guys. But it just, their personality came across, and I thought, yeah, if anybody ever encounters the Ifschnitz, it'll be like these two characters, these funny guys that were in this Doctor Who episode. Help me out. I don't remember the details. I'd love to watch the sequence again now, because it's years later and I don't know if I even have any connection to it. But that was sort of, it was like I could imagine these two guys working in like a news agent. A little bit like, not only Fools and Horses. What's the one Ronnie Barker is running the shop? Anyway, I'm getting beside my point. The Ifschnitz, that's where they came from, but they were going to be an NPC race. That was its own separate beast. Finally, my last race, it was occurring to me in watching a lot of Star Trek at the time, I don't really have a Vulcan per se. I don't have the logical race in my game. And I think anybody who's coming in to roll up a character might want to do a Spock thing. That's a major touchstone of science fiction, is kind of the cold analytical alien. I need that. So what am I going to do? How am I going to create this? And I seem to recall I came up with the name first, which is weird. What I did was, I was playing around with, I was taking computer programming in school, and we had Apple IIs in the classroom, and I was learning about random number generators and stuff like that, which I thought might be useful in a game or a campaign or something. And I remember playing around with okay, I'm making these alien races, and I want to make another name for a race. So why don't I just make a random length of a word between 4 and 7 characters, randomly starting with consonants at the beginning, consonants at the end, and vowels in the middle, or sometimes, rarely will there be a vowel at the beginning or a vowel at the end. And then I would just plug it in and run it and see what words come out. And there were 3 that really stood out. It was a pile of gobbledygook gibberish that would never be usable. I threw that away. But I remember going through the list of, 30 odd names of words. And there were 3 on there that I was like, that would actually work. The first one was the ruin. I thought, that sounds like something. That triggers in my mind the ruin. Yeah. I wonder who they would be. Never used it. If somebody wants to take it, go for it. The next one was, I think, it was either the Strig or the Krig, or maybe the Crib. I can't remember. I'm going to go with Strig. Again, it was a word that kind of that almost looks like something. And I'm sure it's sort of got a Lovecraft sort of a vibe going to it. Might even look like something out of Wales. I'm not sure. But anyway. But the third one on the list, I thought, that's my race. That is the one that I'm going to go for. Because it actually looks a lot like the word Spock. The name of the race was Scock. S-C-O-C. I thought to myself, that sounds like something. And since I'm looking for an alien race that's basically the Vulcans, Scock. Yes. What are the Scock? And the word sounded like a spidery creature to me in honeycombs or something. I don't know why, just, words have got a certain, they trigger your imagination a certain way. And I came up with this little darling tarantula fella. This is all my own drawing. And I thought to myself, okay, I'm really going out on a limb here. This is bizarre. It's a little bit like the probe droid from Empire Strikes Back-ish. And I decided to go purple because it was a color I hadn't really used much. I was like, hey, let's go for broke. Let's make a purple race. Why not? So the Scock were the final entry, and I thought, yeah, that's actually working. They are a very intelligent, logical tarantula type race. And I thought to myself, they kind of should go with the Vrusks in a way. And I was like, well, how am I going to do that? And I just thought to myself, well, Earth has unique biospheres, biozones, like the Galapagos Islands, or you've got people on one continent who didn't have a lot of interaction with others. Say, for example, the Aborigines in Australia. That's probably an insulting term now. The first people of Australia. And I remember thinking to myself, why not have the Scock be from a continent on the home planet of the Vrusk? That way it shares the insect-like background, but also is different. And I think they would work very well meshed in with Vrusk culture, because the Vrusks are very business-like, very corporate. I keep using that word, but that's the only word I can come up with. Entrepreneur types. And the Scock are very logical. How are you going to make them different from the Vulcans? Well, why don't we just go full bore logic with the Scock? They were almost completely non-emotional at all. They strictly thought in terms of intellect. And I used to think to myself, okay, so for example, having a Scock in your party might not necessarily be the best thing, because if you're surrounded by some robots or the Sathar or something like that, and you're in a bit of combat, a well-played Scock might actually go, I've analyzed our odds, and actually the robots are going to win, so I'm leaving. That was sort of the very heart of what I thought of with the Scock. They were going to be that level of logic. Take the Vulcan notion, but go 10 times further with it. So that was my Vulcan race, the Scock. We ran into them occasionally, not very often, but I think they rounded out my world very nicely. And that was where kind of I stopped, because I thought to myself, well, I don't really have any players for this right now anyway. That's 8 or 9 different creatures to keep on top of. Like if you enter a bar, oh my God, it's going to be like the Creature Cantina in Star Wars or Jabba's Palace. It's like, holy, there's so many different creatures here. So I just decided, okay, I'm going to sort of pump the brakes here. I've placed these creatures throughout my campaign on different worlds in a way that makes sense. I think this will work for me. And what ended up happening, the Pickwicks were very common and really enjoyed. A lot of my players played Pickwicks. The Gablethoom were never even encountered. The Ifschnitz, never used them. I thought I'd keep them standing by just in case. And the Scock made 1 or 2 appearances. Nobody ever played them, but they were at least there in various scientific roles or something that would require, the very intelligent, logical alien. So yeah, that is those are the aliens that I came up with for my campaign. And I just thought I would, maybe touch on something unique to my particular campaign, because I've talked a lot about what's straight out of the Starfrontiers rulebook. Now it's time to flesh it out and talk about what made mine different and unique. In fact, I may go into even more of the house rules that I came up with for my campaign. But we'll see. We'll see. There's a lot that I still want to talk about with Starfrontiers. However, for now, I'm going to leave it there. And so until next time, we'll see you down the rabbit hole.